This podcast is brought to you by WorkL, a platform helping people get happier at work. Find out more at workl.co. Work happier.
A business is just a microcosm for society. There needs to be a massive listening exercise. How do people feel when they come to work? What do they need in order to kind of thrive? We need to give everyone a space.
Welcome to the Happy Work Life podcast, where people with inspiring careers reflect on how happy they have been in their working lives. On this podcast, we hear from a range of people working in business, startups, science, academia, media, healthcare, fashion, and much more, and find out which roles gave them the most satisfaction and, importantly, what they have done to get happier at work. So, sit down with me, Mark Price, founder of WorkL, to help you get happier at work. WorkL is the platform where you can find a job in the happiest companies, take our happiness test, network, and get career support from experts, and much, much more. In this edition of the Happy Work Life podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Sereena Abbassi. Now, Sereena was formerly the worldwide head of culture and inclusion at M&C Saatchi, but she's done lots in the equality and inclusion space. She's now an advisor, a coach, a public speaker, a writer, and is regarded by many as the absolute authority. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to her about her working life and her career, her time in an advertising group, but more importantly, how she thinks businesses can improve culture and inclusion in their organisations. Sereena, it's fantastic that you've joined us. And what I'd like to do is to start, if I may, with your early years, because you went to BRIT School, which is amazing. You went there to study art and design, and then also music. So tell us about your early years. You're obviously tremendously creative and talented. So where did that come from? And tell us about BRIT School and what that was like.
Yeah, sure. You're too kind. So shall I start with my parents? Is that a good place to start? Yeah, I'll start there. So my dad is Persian Iranian and my mother is, I have to put the Persian bit because he tells me off if I don't. And my mum is British Jamaican. So my dad came to the UK just before the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979 and came in late 1978. And he came to pursue his dream of becoming a microbiologist. So that was very much part of his kind of, his pursuit when he was here. And also, I think it was quite evident for him that things were kind of changing, kind of socially within Iran. But my dad's always had a very creative spirit. And but my granddad wasn't really in favour of him kind of pursuing anything creative or musical. So that's just to kind of give you, I think there's definitely something baked into my DNA. And my mum is British Jamaican. My great granddad actually came over in the Windrush and then sent for my granddad that subsequently came a few years later. And yeah, my mum was a special needs teacher, but my mum's incredibly creative. She's just, you look at her and she looks like an art teacher, but she wasn't an art teacher. She was mummy used to teach RE and humanities and English. That's a little bit about my parents. And I suppose that's always kind of fed into me, really. My parents, my dad wanted me to be a doctor when I was really little. And he could see that I didn't really have much interest for my stethoscope and was more interested in, drawing and painting. And yeah, my parents just allowed me to pursue that. But I think maybe there's also an aspect of that. Maybe there's a gendered aspect to that. Because I'm the eldest. I wonder whether my brother, who is 5 years younger than me, would have been given the same opportunity just to kind of explore his creativity, because he's always had, he had quite a different upbringing in that sense, where I think there was a hell of a lot more pressure applied to him because he's the only boy, which I think kind of, all of that kind of feeds into kind of the work that I do. There is, I think when we talk about the patriarchy, I think it's easy for us to just think of women or non-binary folk as being victims within it, but I think also men very much are as well, and the pressures that are applied to men. So the way that I think that's kind of the origins of where I started.
And then how did you get into BRIT School?
Yeah,
That's
so
amazing. What age were you when you went there?
you can start the BRIT School from the age of 14. So you can start there in year 10, and you can do your GCSEs there. So my parents divorced when I was well, they finally divorced, shall I say, when I was about 8. And so yes, so we were living with my mum, and then we were living in Berkshire, and I just had this, I used to get the stage. I think it was every week it used to come out the stage. I can't quite remember now because it was so many years ago, but it was this kind of industry, creative industry, arts, performance art kind of publication that would come out, which I think was weekly. And I just had such a huge determination at that age to be a fashion designer and also be a singer. So, I was sending like demos off to kind of record labels at the age of like 12. It was quite like, honestly, I would love to meet my 12-year-old self now. Yeah, she was so unbelievably confident, and there were so many rejections. It was constant rejections. I remember getting a message from like at least a kind of like a letter back from Abbey Roads, and I was just absolutely ecstatic. Like it wasn't anything that suggested that they were remotely interested in this demo that I'd sent, but I still really appreciated at least getting a letter back. And yeah, so I applied. And with the BRIT School, you have to either audition or you have to show a portfolio, depending what your major or minor is. So my major was art and design, and then my minor was music. And you have a huge amount of lessons that are focused around your kind of major and minor throughout the week. You don't do what I think is actually quite important, like, subjects such as history or geography. You do your basics, English, maths, and science, and then the rest is literally just your major and minor. I think really in hindsight, just kind of looking back, I probably would have gone down the more kind of conventional academic route and then maybe pursued the arts a little bit later, rather than at the age of 14, because I do feel like I missed an awful lot of quite important stuff. So
And did you enjoy your time at the BRIT School?
it was wonderful in so many ways, but also really, really difficult, because when you are at, say, like a normal school, a typical school, you tend to be the shining star if you've got like a talent, and then people know you for that. And then when you're kind of thrusted into an organisation or a school such as an institution such as the BRIT School, where everyone is so extraordinarily talented, it's quite a lot really to kind of navigate at such a tender age, really. And also I was, I had a few issues with the headmistress. She really didn't like me for some reason. Probably because I was a bit too confident, and my confidence has it's definitely been an issue for some.
And so you left the BRIT School to go to University of Brighton, but you kept with the art theme because you studied visual arts, performance, and music. So you must have still loved that to have gone on to Brighton to study the same.
Yeah, I absolutely did. So just to kind of rewind a little bit. So I left the BRIT School. I went to college, Kingston. And then in the second year of college, we decided as a family to move to Tehran. So I moved to Iran with my brother and my father. And I was only there for 8 months, but it completely just reshaped my worldview, to be honest. I know we're not here to talk politics, but everything is political. You can't really get away from that. But my experience of being there and feeling like a second class citizen based on my gender, being on the buses and as a woman needing to sit at the back of the bus, and it was and I'd lived such an insular life. It was just me and my dreams up until that point. And then at the age of 18, living in Iran and kind of just seeing just how blessed I am to be British, to have a British passport, to be able to travel, that free movement, and, you know, not to need permission from my father or husband in order to leave the country. That's what it was, at least. That's what it was like, at least then. I don't know if it's still the case now. So, yeah, it really opened things up for me. So when I did actually come back to the UK 8 months later, a few months before turning 19, it touched me. I changed as a person, and actually, I suppose my pursuits as a singer and a fashion designer just seemed not as significant, just not as significant, and I just felt like there was something more. So I kind of had a little bit of fashion experience, worked for a couple of magazines just as an intern, and really hated it. It just didn't really feel like it was feeding my soul, to be honest, in any way. But I've always loved music and singing as an outlet. So I was in a couple of bands, nothing major in any way. And then I found this course in Brighton, and it was just perfect. You know, it was a very small cohort, only 13, 14 of us. And you know, one of my best friends, who I'd kind of met about a year previous to that, was also on the course as well, completely by coincidence. We both applied and we both got in, and it was just absolutely wonderful. Sadly, the course doesn't exist anymore at Brighton University. But yeah, it was absolutely wonderful, and it gave me an opportunity to kind of delve into subjects. So just before doing the course, I did an A-level in sociology, because I was clearly on this path of wanting to kind of be, you know, yeah, I suppose it being less about me and my pursuits, and actually about, like, actually what can I contribute to society. So I'd done that, then went to Brighton, and absolutely loved my time in Brighton. It was extraordinarily difficult, though. There was a lot of family crises that happened in that time, where my brother tried to take his life, and my mother was quite ill, and we had to have her sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So university wasn't easy in any way. It was hard, but it was still brilliant. And I had such a wonderful time.
So you've explained to us your early stirrings about wanting to do something about inclusion and equality. But tell us about how you took that forward after university, because you obviously went on to become the worldwide head of culture and inclusion for M&C Saatchi. So how did you get from finishing your course at Brighton University, having these sort of instincts and feeling that things weren't right, and feelings about social justice, and then ending up in that job? What was that journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it was an interesting journey. So graduated, and then I'd lived in a few different countries for a bit. You know, I did a lot of traveling. I was in America for a bit, I was in Spain for a bit, I was in the Netherlands, always kind of nurturing creative projects, which was wonderful. And then I was in New York, and then there was this incident that happened, and this was pre-Me Too, and you know, it was nothing horrific that had happened to me, but the person was instigating something, and this person was much more senior to me, and I was just like, there must be another way in which I can kind of live my purpose. So, you know, the purpose that I kind of felt, you know, what I felt was my purpose was to help people connect to themselves so they can better connect to each other. And for me, the medium in which I did that was art, music. But then I was like, there must be another way. And then it just kind of sent me on this journey to kind of figuring out what that might be. I did a few kind of learning and development courses in New York, and then made my way back eventually to the UK, and then set up one of my first businesses, which was basically helping underrepresented groups get into the creative industries. And then I eventually actually was kind of headhunted out of my own business to go and work for M&C Saatchi. So that's kind of how it came about.
How did you set up your own business? Because you just said that so lightly. Oh, I was headhunted out of my own business. So for a lot of people, they're saying, oh my goodness, you've set up your own business. How did you do that?
Yeah, I did. I lent on a few really deep, like, really wonderful deep friendships that I've got to kind of help me strategize, brainstorm. I had this idea about connectivity, still really sticking to my purpose, but like, what were the different ways in which I could do that? And actually, I'm just remembering, I'm thinking out loud. I went to go and work in recruitment. And when I was in recruitment, and I obviously can't mention the names of the companies, one of the companies was wonderful. I worked for two different recruitment companies. One of them was wonderful, the other one was awful. And it was really interesting. We received a portfolio. So I was basically working for the creative industries, but in recruitment. And we received a portfolio, and the person that owned the company, who was also my line manager, said, oh, we can't put that person forward because they've got the wrong name. And it was just really, it was, I think I was so absolutely naive I just couldn't believe that sort of thing happened. And it was even more surprising because this person was a person of color. And I really didn't expect it to come from them, the last person, in fact. And then it just kind of just set me on this path, and I was just like, okay, there's clearly something that I can do within this particular area of the creative industry. So it was advertising, branding. So I then, as I said, I lent on friends, asked them to kind of help me strategize or kind of bring all these ideas that I had together. And then I reached out to people within the industry, so within the kind of advertising, branding industry, but with never any like intention to kind of essentially like sell myself in a hard way to them, but really just to make a friend, and also like share any knowledge that I had, and just it feeling like it was reciprocal. Because I think sometimes when people go out there to network, which I really don't like that term anyway, it feels like they're wanting to take something from you and not actually replenish. And the way that I've always approached it is that it's this beautiful kind of symbiotic, I'm giving to you, you're giving to me. And, many of those friendships I still have, So, yeah.
And what were you selling? So what services were you selling into the marketing industry?
Yeah, so the services that I was selling, so I created this thing called a creative hackathon. So it was kind of working with schools and getting youngsters their first foot in the door into the creative industries. So, for instance, we would spend a full day kind of brainstorming different ideas, and hopefully then some of those ideas will be taken on, and also some of the students that were all young people, because they weren't all students, would then be able to go and work for these businesses as interns or as juniors. So it was essentially helping them become more connected to an industry that they didn't really have any connection to because they didn't have family members that were within the industry. And then there was also the reverse mentoring scheme, which is a hell of a lot more kind of popular now, but rewinding 10 years ago or 9 years ago, that it just wasn't the case. And then there was also the consultative kind of side of what I used to do, so kind of training and speaking, etc.
And then you got headhunted out of that.
Yes.
So tell us about that. Tell us what happened next.
Yeah, so I was then reached out to by a headhunter, and there was this post that they weren't, explicitly advertising for M&C Saatchi Group, and yeah, I had a few interviews and I kind of got the job pretty quickly. So yeah, it was amazing. It was an amazing 2.5 years, and I feel incredibly grateful to have had that experience. So worked alongside some wonderful people, some people that are still very much a part of my life in some sort of way. Maybe it's just through social media, or maybe it's the fact that we send each other an occasional text or meet each other once a year for, lunch or dinner. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. I think it really broadened my mind as well. So what I should have also said is, in addition to kind of running my first business, I also started a master's in post-colonial culture and global policy at Goldsmiths University London. And I don't know if you know much about Goldsmiths, but it's a very lefty institution, which has its pros, but also has its cons. And I think then being thrusted into a organisation, a big corporation, that maybe some might say is more kind of right-leaning. I'm not saying that, but some might say. I think it really helped me to have more of a balanced view on the world, and not such a polarized view in my own politics as a person, but actually our politics can be a constellation of lots of different things, and it just doesn't have to kind of exist on a straight line.
And tell us something about the role. So you were called the worldwide head of culture and inclusion. So what did that mean? What did you do?
Yeah, so pretty much everything that I did within my business, not entirely, but mostly. So lots of advisory, consultative work, creating different programs. So whether it be a reverse mentoring scheme or a kind of traditional mentoring scheme. It could also be, oh goodness, what else did I do? It would also be creating employee resource groups as well. So if anyone that isn't familiar with what an employee resource group is, or ERG, an ERG is where different characteristics within an organisation come together because there's an understanding that there's sometimes, but not all the time, a need for a safe space. And but that safe space, I also believe, needs to have allies as well. So you need to have people that are kind of invited into that space so they can fully understand the issues that the business might have. So yeah, a lot of the work I did was around that. And you know what, there were just so many incredible people that were kind of co-leading all of those ERGs, because I think we had about 7 or something like that, at least back then. I don't know what it's like now, it's quite a few years ago. So yeah, it was absolutely wonderful. And then it was also giving people that wouldn't have the kind of social capital, so they wouldn't know people that worked for a business such as, you know, M&C Saatchi or any kind of big corporation in London, giving them an opportunity to kind of meet people and form friendships. So I was constantly making introductions to youngsters that were just starting out, that were working on really interesting projects and startups, and introducing them to the then worldwide CEO, you know, and he was incredibly receptive and open, or other parts of the business as well.
And so you had 2.5 very happy years there.
It was wonderful, yes.
So why did you move on? What did you do next?
Yeah, I feel like, you know, it's like, you know, sometimes it's like, it's the same like with a kind of romantic relationship, isn't it? Sometimes you feel like you just kind of get to the end of the road with something or someone. And so I then decided to go fully into consultative mode. So I have my consultancy, which I still run. And but I have to say, I always did kind of consulting even when I was kind of in-house as well. They were very kind of open and easy to me kind of working on projects, providing there wasn't a conflict of interest. So I just decided to do that full time. And when I kind of handed in my notice, this was like pre-George Floyd, but by the time my notice had finished, George Floyd had been killed. So I was incredibly busy and incredibly lucky. Like, one of the first clients that I took on was Sony Music and Sony Music UK. And it was just, yeah, it's been a really incredible journey the last 3.5 years, I think it's been. And or just under 3.5 years since leaving. And yes, that's what I've been doing, working with lots of different organizations, helping them with their kind of cultural transformation. You know, my 2 specialist areas are kind of like race and class, but in all honesty, I think you know, it's also so much bigger than that. You know, it's about, how do people feel when they come to work? What do they need in order to kind of thrive? And helping businesses just really understand that.
So tell us what your thoughts are now about inclusion and diversity, and tell us how far you think corporates have come or perhaps haven't come.
Yeah, so I think there's been, on the most part, a huge amount of interest from a lot of corporations. But I think what hasn't happened is I think some people have just been left behind in the conversation, or they haven't been enrolled properly. So I think some folks feel that actually I'm excluded from this diversity inclusion conversation, a bit like what I said at the very beginning. When we think about the patriarchy, sometimes we actually forget to include men in that, cis men. And I think what the industry needs to do is it needs to make sure that everyone feels like they're being brought along as well, and acknowledge that actually, all of us can feel hurt in different ways, that it's not just down to, or feel that we haven't been served in the way that we need to in order to thrive within the workplace. And that isn't just down to the colour of someone's skin or their gender. So I just think it just needs to be a bit more nuanced and a bit more open-hearted in some ways as well.
And do you think that businesses are getting better, or do you still think there's an awful long way to go?
I think for the most part, businesses are getting better. My experience has been the more conservative a business, the easier it is to progress, actually, the conversation. And my reason for that is I think when a business is more conservative leaning, even though I don't like that kind of polarity, but I'm just going to use it just for argument's sake, I think that there's an openness to exactly where they are. They're not pretending to be anything that they're not. And I think when a business is more, left leaning, there's a lot more to kind of unpick, because I think so much of their identity is bound up in virtue signaling or appearing as being a particular way. I found in my experience there's a lack of honesty, if I'm going to be completely honest. and so I can definitely see a difference. And actually, I think the more conservative businesses that I've worked with as a consultant, they've definitely progressed the dial much further than the ones that are more left-leaning.
And what tips or advice would you give to employers now about creating a more inclusive organisation?
What would I do? So I think the first tip I would do is that there needs to be a massive listening exercise. You have to listen to every single person in the organisation. And you need to give everyone a space, not just those that kind of come under the protected characteristics. So absolutely everyone. And that space needs to be confidential as well. So I would 100% recommend, making sure that you outsource that work rather than having your in-house HR team do it. I think, and I think once that listening exercise is done, there needs to be some sort of strategy and some sort of roadmap. But ultimately, there needs to be a real firm commitment from the senior leadership that this is something that they really want and are invested in. But I think there also just needs to be an honest conversation that change takes time, and for people's expectations to be managed, and for there to be transparency, but also knowing, like, as a business leader, the kind of boundaries of transparency as well. I think it still needs to be boundaried to some degree, and it's a bit of a balancing act, just so the business itself is also protecting itself. So there's lots of different elements, but ultimately it's listening, but I think also, when we think about cultural change within an organization, we often think it's something that the business needs to do. And I think it also needs to be reframed as employees also need to understand that you have to kind of meet your employer somewhere as well on that journey.
And I know this is sort of like a really obvious question, but why do you think it's better to have more inclusive businesses?
I think it's more important to have more inclusive businesses because you want people to feel like they're able to thrive in the workplace, right? And I think it's really difficult for anyone to thrive if they don't feel fully included and respected. And ultimately, I think, a business is just a microcosm for society. So us acknowledging that as society becomes more diverse in all different ways, what are the things that we need to put in place in order for that diversity to thrive and there to be harmony, between different groups within society, but also within the workplace.
Well, I wish you every success in the space that you're in, which is making businesses more inclusive for, as you said, not just race, but gender, and also around social mobility. So, Sereena, many congratulations on all you've achieved, and we look forward to seeing what you do next. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Lord Price.
To listen to more episodes and find out how to get happy in your working life, head to workl.co. Work happier.